President Disak, members of the National Assembly of Serbia, thank you for allowing me to present on the issue of harm reduction. My name is Lindsey Stroud. I'm the director of the Consumer Center at the Taxpayers Protection Alliance. TPA is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to educating the public through the research, analysis, and dissemination of information on the government's effects on the economy. I'm also creator and manager of Tobacco Harm Reduction 101, and I've been actively researching and writing on this issue of tobacco and harm reduction since 2016. So, what is harm reduction? Well, harm reduction can be defined as the policies and programs that aim to minimize negative health effects and the social and legal impacts associated with risky behaviors. Essentially, harm reduction is anything that reduces harm, from condoms to safety belts in automobiles to clean needles for drug users to tobacco harm reduction products. Society has consistently sought to reduce the harm posed by risky behaviors and/or biological threats. Condoms have been around for thousands of years. The first documentation of condom was reported to be used by King Minos of Crete around 3000 BC. Condoms were also used by ancient Roman and Egyptian civilization. And today, condoms are 98% effective in protecting against most sexually transmitted diseases. The discovery of HIV/AIDS in the 1980s brought about the popularity of condoms as a contraceptive to protect against that disease, as well as other sexually transmitted diseases. And condoms were actively promoted among sexually active persons to reduce their exposure. Another subgroup disproportionately impacted by HIV/AIDS is intravenous IV drug users. In 1984, the United States Centers for Disease Control and Prevention urged Americans to refrain from IV drug use, but communities were beginning to apply harm reduction principles. Specifically, communities began needle exchange services where IV drug users could safely receive new clean needles for their drug use. While offering access to clean needles to prevent transmission of deadly diseases, needle exchange services also offer a variety of injection supplies such as bleach, cotton, and alcohol wipes, as well as condoms and referrals to drug treatment programs and social services. Unfortunately, the U.S. government wasn't on board with this. In 1988, the United States Congress enacted a prohibition on the use of federal funds for needle exchange programs, and this would be fully intact until 2015. And in 1991, these needle exchange services were only in a handful of cities and in a few communities in Australia, Canada, and England. By 2007, there was an estimated 185 needle exchange programs in the United States. Research from legal state exchange programs has also seen a reduction in HIV prevalence. 3 years of longitudinal studies examined New York's needle exchange program between 1990 and 2002 and reported that HIV prevalence decreased from 50% to 17%. The U.S. opioid epidemic has continued to help advance harm reduction measures. Between 1999 and 2019, approximately 500,000 Americans have died from an opioid overdose. Not only have needle exchanges services been embraced by the U.S. government, other harm reduction measures have been introduced to combat the crisis. Medication-assisted treatment and the opioid drug reversal naloxone have all been deployed by the federal government. In fact, the federal government has increased funding for such programs. In 2016, the U.S. Medicaid program spent $985.7 million on Medicaid-assisted treatment drugs and naloxone. This increased to $1.2 billion in 2018. Tobacco harm reduction is another form of harm reduction. Cigarette smoking is responsible for an estimated 8 million annual global deaths. And since the 1950s, leading public health agencies across the world have understood the ill effects of combustible cigarettes. In 1976, a leading tobacco harm reduction researcher, Michael Russell, declared that people smoke for the nicotine but die from the tar. Nicotine, despite being addictive, is not a harmful chemical. Surgeon General in the UK Royal College of Physicians found that nicotine, while addictive, is not the primary cause of smoking-related diseases. And there are numerous forms of tobacco harm reduction products, including smokeless, snus, e-cigarettes, and heated tobacco products. One of the examples of the awesome power of tobacco harm reduction products is Swedish men, who have the highest rate of smokeless tobacco use in Europe, but they also have the lowest rates of lung cancer and other smoking-related diseases in Europe. If men in all other countries of the European Union substituted smokeless tobacco for smoking at the same rates as Swedish men, almost 274,000 deaths per year would be prevented. E-cigarettes are relatively new products, but have been found by numerous public health groups to be less harmful than smoking. Public Health England has determined that e-cigarettes are around 95% safer than smoking. The Royal College of Physicians found the use of e-cigarettes and vaping devices unlikely to exceed 5% of the risk of the harm from smoking tobacco. The National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine noted that using current generation e-cigarettes is less harmful than smoking. Heated tobacco products also allow users to obtain nicotine without the harmful effects of combustion and have been found to be less harmful than smoking. In the United States, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration has allowed one such product to actually have a modified risk disclaimer and allows the manufacturer to market their product as safer than cigarettes. While the previous forms of harm reduction discussed include risky behaviors, driving a car is typically not on the list of adverse behaviors. Yet, automobile accidents are responsible for an estimated 1.35 million global deaths each year. Despite this, the history of the seatbelt was a contentious one, at least in the United States. In 1961, Wisconsin became the first state that required automobile manufacturers to install seatbelts in all vehicles. The U.S. government instituted a national mandate in 1968. These laws did not require persons to actually wear the seatbelt. The U.S. National Highway Traffic Safety Administration put forth a requirement for all newly manufactured cars to include a seatbelt interlock mechanism that would prevent automobiles from starting until the driver's seatbelt had been buckled. Congress would block this, and the issue would make its way to the United States Supreme Court, which ruled in favor of the Traffic Safety Administration. Eventually, in 1985, Nancy Dole, then Secretary of the Transportation, issued a rule that would require automakers to install driver's side airbags in all new cars unless 2/3 of the states passed mandatory seatbelt laws. Worldwide, an estimated 80% of countries reported front seat seatbelt national or subnational laws. CDC estimates that seatbelts reduce the risk of death by 45% and cut the risk of serious injury by 50%. So in conclusion, from condoms to drug use to cigarettes to automobiles, innovations have developed and are continuously sought to reduce the risk of adverse behaviors and/or action. Government policies should not interfere with efforts by public health, manufacturers, and consumers to expand access to harm reduction innovations. Harm reduction policies have effectively reduced the harms and deaths associated with adverse products, as well as helped promote continued safety among such users. Governments should work with individuals, the private sector, and public health organizations to monitor harm reduction developments, as well as promote their use. Again, thank you for your time today.